All right, thank you, Pete. Thank you, everybody. First of all, let's start with the acknowledgement to country. We are in non-Awal country, and we pay our respects to the present and future generations and the traditional custodians of this land. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm really pleased to introduce today Maria Mejia for today's seminar at the Fenner School of Environment and Society. It has been a long conspiration with Maria and Peter talking about the possibility of having her here today, and finally is the day. Thank you, Peter, for helping and co-conspirating with us. Maria is a Colombian political scientist, and you can correct me if I am wrong, Colombian political scientist. Her career has expanded to Colombia, Germany, the United States, and the Philippines. She holds a double major in economics and political science from the Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. She has also done studies in architecture and cities. She has worked with the Asian Development Bank, with German cooperation agencies, PIK Institute, among others. But now she's back at home in Colombia, and she's working at the Humboldt Institute in Colombia as the leader of the Biodiversities by 2030 initiative that is a program promoted by the national government in partnership with the World Economic Forum. She's a very curious and proactive lady. She has been hosting radio shows. She has worked in Yosemite National Park, volunteering organizations in Bogota. And recently, she finished her Master Science in Global Environmental Change in Germany. And she's going to share with us today some more the findings from her research. So thank you, Maria. I know it's very late in Colombia now, but really thank you for coming today. I'll open you the screen for you.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, everybody. Hola. Good night from Bogota. It's already 9 p.m. here, Wednesday. So hello from the past. Such an honor to be here. Thank you everyone for registering to the seminar. I hope it delivers, and I hope this framework also provides you all with new lenses when it comes to talk and analyze urban nature. Big thanks to Claudia and to Peter to make this possible after a lot of weeks of conspiration behind this. So I will share my screen with you all. Apologies in advance if I make you a bit dizzy, because I will be just like going all over the place, zooming in and zooming out. I just found this platform, it's very handy when it comes to put together photos and everything. So the title of our seminar is Let's Talk About Power, People, and Urban Nature, who is to decide what pieces of nature should be kept in cities. So I would like to start with a personal story here, and it was back in 2014, 2015, when I was leading the urban work stream at the National Research Institute of Biodiversity, the Humboldt Institute. You know, I was talking about how greener cities are good for everything and for everyone, and basically just the idea of that we should have more green just because. But at some point, I just started feeling that I was missing part of the story, like a huge part of the story. And basically, three key messages I want to share with you all before I introduce the framework. So some of the crucial ideas that I was missing was, first, cities are highly contested places, right? So things happen, a lot of development pressures take place in our city. So imagine you have a cake and everyone is just trying to take the slice with the highest revenue and the lowest investment. So it's by like the entry point will be that the city is a highly contested place. So you have housing pressures, and you have also development of a mall. This is in Cape Town in an urban wetland, and some campaign to protect this Princess Vale wetland. And Bogota, we also have a lot of examples, and I'm sure you are familiar. If you look around your neighborhoods and other countries you are from, probably you know, I mean, I'm pretty sure you are familiar with this kind of social mobilizations. So this is indigenous voices rising to protect wetland against housing. This is Cali, our third largest city in Colombia, against a motorway project, and how some activists mobilize values towards this green corridor and wetland and the wildlife that was in this place. This is another example in Cali, another wetland, and this was against like a transport, really hard infrastructure, like a huge south terminal in the city. And Stockholm, we also have an example back in the 1990, how they managed to link ecological values and royal heritage values in order to make like a story connecting pieces that were not connected before, and they kind of won this process. But I mean, pressures still kept going, but at least for these 5 years, 1990 and 1995, they managed to stop construction works on the site. So the other message will be that local ecosystem management play a crucial but neglected role in upholding urban ecosystem services. So this is an example, like what is the impact of people restoring a wetland, like, you know, like civil groups in the general ecological outcome of the city. Like, for example, the work of 15,000 students in Bogota city just to recover and restore a wetland that was highly fragmented, and neither the local government, neither the regional government, they were not reaching consensus at all about who should be taking care of this. And in the meantime, the wetland was basically disappearing, as you can see in the photos. So this was basically thanks to a work of a lot of schools that team up and restored the connectivity of this wetland. Or another example is how people and neighborhoods in this park in Bogota with citizen science identify very important pollinator species, and they came up with the idea of connecting private gardens with the public park, and broader than that with the eastern hills of Bogota. So these are local management practices that actually impact the generation and distribution of ecosystem services in our cities. And sometimes these practices are underlooked. And then the last message will be, when you say that you have nature, like higher value nature, that means that there is also like a lower value nature. So who gets to protect what? And I want here to ask you a question. If you think that the process of attaching value to a certain piece of nature, do you think it's an abstract process? Do you think it's a material process? Whenever you're a scientist and you are running your maps of, I don't know, identifying conservation objects and soils that need to be protected, or whenever you are an activist and you are mobilizing different elements. So I just want to, just for you to keep in mind this question of how value creating processes are actually a material practice. There's nothing abstract about when we come to decide or make popular some values to protect this piece of nature or that piece of nature in cities. So with that in mind, this is the framework I use for my thesis. Basically, the social production of ecosystem services, or how I like to call it, how stories shape the ecology of our cities, because basically the whole research is like a tribute of the power of the stories, like the power of narrative, of protective narrative and protective stories, and we will break down this idea in the following examples. So first of all, what the author is telling us here is that value creating processes is a social material practice. And what does it mean? It means that you have artifacts, you have actors, and you have social arenas. And these actors kind of link the artifacts with social arenas, and you use that to assemble a story. Examples of artifacts. So examples of artifacts, you can have artifacts that you create for your mobilization, or you can use an appeal to already existing artifacts like scientific reports that somehow were forgotten in the bookshelves, and you remember that that technical report had maps or scenarios or ecosystem services list or endangered species list that probably is useful for you to shape your story. So we can have scientific reports, numeric values, maps, list of species I already mentioned. Laws or national acts are also very powerful artifacts when it comes to bring together these stories, this kind of stories. Dissemination materials as poster, banners, flyers, artwork, and even physical structures. And we will look at an example, not exactly buildings, but just like a physical structure. So I will just keep the expectation there. And you have social arenas. So some of the examples are, of course, the participation in media and newspapers and TV programs and radio interviews, and also public debates, blocking machinery, street demonstrations, exhibition, and when you gather around your city hall or Congress, and when you also do some political lobbying with people holding high positions in your local government. The fascinating thing with this is that as soon as you start using these lenses to analyze different mobilizations in your city, then you can, or across cities even better, you will start finding surprises, like new social arenas and new artifacts that you will say like, oh, how these people came to do that. So this is the first analytical mode that the author is offering to us. Value creating processes as a social material practice, right? Where you mobilize artifacts and social arenas. Now, it gets a bit more complicated, but the good news is that since we are analyzing this complexity, it's also closer to reality. It's not an easy analysis, but it's just, if we want to address environmental justice, then this is kind of a more, I will not say accurate, but it's just like open up new layers and help us unpack power relationships. So the second analytical mode is ecological complexity. And the good thing of approaching the city as an ecological network is that many times, for example, if you are an environmental justice scholar, you come from the social sciences and your understanding about the urban ecology is not quite complex, and it's, we can say, a bit rudimentary probably. And if we approach the city as a complex network, we will realize that ecosystem services are not black boxes distributing benefits just on equal basis across the city. There is like uneven relation, and it will depend on which nodes are more protected and which nodes of the network have hold like higher management capacity. And I will explain that in a moment. So this is the second analytical mode of the framework. And in my case, for my thesis, I use very basic principles of landscape ecology. So I look at transition, connectivity, continuity, and I kind of speculate based on documents and city plans and programs. I speculate how those nodes that I was analyzing had an impact on the broader like ecological network of the city. I was a bit nervous at the very beginning when I was approaching this framework, because the authors were talking about quantitative data to run this ecological analysis. So they actually use like field surveys and data about species movement. But yeah, the author, I had a conversation with him and he said like, this is not at all like an assessment. We are not, I didn't plan this for people to run an assessment and just run models or like ecological models. It's just like like approach it as a tool that help you unpack how power shapes the ecology of the city. So I did more the qualitative analysis of landscape ecology. So here, the theory is that each node of the network holds a protected capacity and a management capacity. Protected capacity is understood as the ability of the node, like, resist to disappear, right? And that can be due to technical aspects or biophysical aspects or civil efforts. So for example, biophysical aspects. Let's say this node is on the slope of the city. So it will be very difficult to build an infrastructure there. Well, that's not the case in our Colombian slopes, but in theory, from the biophysical perspective, it will be hard just to develop any project because, for example, the risk of landslide and so on and so forth. So in that sense, if you're in the slope, then your protected capacity could be a bit high, right? But also in terms of technical aspects, if your node is part of a plan or it's already a protected area, or it has been identified by the city land management plan as an important place to protect or restore, then your protected capacity will also be high, right? And then civil efforts. So basically all that we were talking about, these mobilizing values, or if you use press and if you talk to the broader audience in your city and you start like unpacking and just like showing different layers of this node that people never knew before. For example, the existence of a wetland or the existence of a small piece of tropical dry forest. So if people start listening to you, then your protected capacity of that node will also be high thanks to the civil efforts. And then the management capacity. So the author analyzes these two dimensions in each of the nodes, right? And this is the moment we are putting together both analytical modes into motion. So this is kind of like the most exciting part of the research. And the management capacity is that all those practices, day-to-day practices, either for communities or from institutions that will help maintain that place in the network. So for example, if we are talking about urban plan, an urban park, and the city government already have a management plan for this park, then that's good because probably it's already written down some activities or restoration or preservation. So at least they are on paper and someone we hope is undertaking those activities. But if you are not an institution, but for example, a local leader, and you just wake up one day and you decide to start planting trees next to your wetland, well, that's also like a day-to-day practice in your nearby nature, and that will help your place to get management capacity, like a fair level of management capacity. So sorry about all that theoretical part. So this is the way the author started looking at the city. So if you see each node with a protective capacity and a management capacity, and when you zoom in each node, you will find these very nice like social material practices where actors are articulating their stories, basically. So in literature of ecosystem services, this is understood as value articulation. So we no longer look at the city like this. Hold on, sorry. Just like this map over here. But we know that in each part of the city, things are happening, either day-to-day local practices or struggles to protect nature. And that really enriches the way we approach environmental justice in cities. So when I say civil efforts, let me, for example, stay here. do you think that it's accurate to treat communities and civil efforts as homogeneous? Or do you think they actually have differences, like different features that will somehow impact the way and their ability to mobilize values? So you can, I don't know, write something in the chat box like, yes, I think you should treat like communities in a different way, because even though we are talking about civil efforts, well, we know that people hold different dimensions of gender, race, class, and that impact how your capacity to mobilize this. And we will see that in our examples in what follows. So just to keep that, in mind. Okay. Okay, this is important. So these value creation processes are a political program, and it gains power as you pick up more and more artifacts. When you find this technical report, or when you, I don't know, some students start doing site visits in the piece of nature you are trying to protect, and somehow they start taking part of the inventory of a species. And like anytime you add a new artifact, then your story becomes more powerful. So that's why the author said it's a political program, like your protective narrative. So this is Cali, third largest city of Colombia. The dark areas are low-income communities, as you can see, living in the flooded areas, or the slopes with the risk is sometimes not you cannot mitigate the risk. And our study cases are the good thing here is that you should try to compare very opposite sides in terms of economic strata, right? So you can really draw difference between the artifacts and the capital, social capital, economical capital of the actors mobilizing these stories. And so that's exactly what I tried to do here. So on the left, we have the case of a hill, like a little mountain. El Morro translates the hill. And then here, the second case study site is a wetland in a high level income community. Not very high, but between high and very high. All right. So the story here, it's a long story. We will only focus on what happened here in the second hill, which is called El Morro. And as you can see, there was a development pressure for this stage one, and people, they were fighting for the second, for not to the second stage to take part in this Morro. And here I want just to highlight two very important artifacts. The first one is that the city administration said, we want to do some pilots of protected areas. And we know the community there in El Morro is very active and engaged. So please, they contact like a technical advisory group to work together with communities to identify the conservation objects. So it was like a participatory process with local knowledge, but also technical knowledge. And they ended up with a technical report saying why it was important to preserve this area. So that was a very important artifact. And also the participation of this consultancy agency I told you, because they managed kind of link different scales of governance and different sets of knowledge. So it was very important. And then a very important social arena was this carnival in 2014. 5,000 people went out to the street to basically pay tribute to the ecological values of El Morro and the endemic species there and the forest and everything. And as a symbolic act, at the end, the community leaders gave the mayor this technical report, basically saying, please declare the area as protected area. The sad part of the story is that right at the heart the polygon, they left out El Morro because it was already compromised for these housing projects. It was nothing, there was no chance just to save this part. And it was kind of heartbroken because they identified a lot of environmental like values and ecological values, as you can see here, but also sociocultural values. And a very nice story is that one of the most interesting and symbolic artifacts was the Golfito, or mini golf. So this is a working class neighborhood, right? So right next to the El Morro, there is the Country Club of Cali. It's a private, of course, it's a private space. But a lot of generations here in El Morro have grown working for the club. And some of the associates just, you know, gave the equipment for playing golf. So they made their own popular Golfito. They could play for free, and it was not competition with the preservation and the forest. So they actually were resisting these constructing works with practices that they were already implementing, as the Golfito, as the Ecological Kite Festival, or, you know, just like trekking or jogging in the trails and everything. So this was a very important social arena of this mobilization, but it was not enough. So right now they're still fighting, but it's mostly likely that the second stage will take part here. Now let's move to the El Cortijo Wetland. So different from the first study case, which is basically like a story of over 10 years, this was the leaders here organized very, very quickly. In the span, sorry about the Spanish, I hope we all can practice our Spanish here. So in a span of just like between May and December, they managed to hire environmental lawyers, including one of the top lawyers of the city. They installed this resistant tent, or Carpa de la Resistencia, which was a very important artifact in the mobilization. They organized in working groups. So for example, a professor from a university, he was focused on the ecological analysis, on the impact of the terminal, the transport terminal in this area for human health and air quality and so on. And also, for example, an architect, he was the one focusing on analyzing if this was correct and the urban policies will allow to do this. So they mobilized really, really quickly, and they raised money to hire these lawyers. I guess I already mentioned that. And some of the activists were, since they were very involved with universities, so some of the colleagues took students to the site to visit the wetland, and the city just started discovering something the city didn't know it had before. So a wetland, a forest, run of waters, it was a new layer for the whole city. So they had the political capital and social capital to mobilize these arenas and artifacts in a relative short span of time. And I would just like to highlight this artifact, which is the most symbolic one, is the resistant tent. So it became like a knowledge hub. So every day from May until December 2017, activists were there disseminating basically environmental knowledge. So talking about the impacts of the project for human health and for the ecosystem. When they were not explaining the impacts, they will be playing some films or like educational films about the environment and the importance of the wetlands. And every time was someone there in the tent. Even in the hardest and tipping points of the mobilization, they will actually someone spend the night there. And today the tent is still there. So it's like remember when I mentioned as examples of artifacts, physical structure. So this is one example that we found in Cali. And construction works right now are stopped, but it's very likely that the terminal will succeed because in the city plans, the wetland is not identified, you know, like in the layers, in the maps, no one talks about this wetland, it was not identified, therefore there is no environmental plan for this. And here just a list of ecological values that the activists identify and socio-cultural values, sorry, of this site and the hydrological network, not only the wetland, but its relation to the river, to the runoff waters, and to the forest nearby. So we no longer see the city as this plain map here, but we start approaching the city in a bit more complex terms. And each node at the end, you will see and analyze how each node has certain protected capacity, certain management capacity, and how that relates to the socioeconomical strata of that specific node. So it's already, okay, it's 9:33. So I guess my presentation was 30 to 40 minutes. So I still have like 7 minutes because I really want to open the microphone. There are some other examples from other cities in the world, and they are very nice because they show you new arenas, they show you new artifacts, they show you how activists manage to position or make popular certain story. And for example, how the participation of urban designers was also important in some of the other cases I have here that we can further discuss. So, like, I don't know if to say this like take-home messages, but just like some warning signs here is like, whenever you win or you manage to position your story on why it is important to protect certain park or wetland or whatever, just keep in mind that those development pressures will reallocate somewhere else in the city. So, and probably in a place with a very low protective capacity, and probably a place no one is paying attention to. You can also find here cases of not in my backyard sort of thing, meaning that we all want to embrace the narrative of ecosystem services and why green urban is good for everyone. But probably I also mobilize this narrative because I don't want to have a terminal next to my fancy building. So yes, the narrative can be powerful in terms of the ecology of the city as a whole, but it can also be a tool for, I don't know, like high income neighborhoods to fight with a lot of power and capital projects and development projects that probably other communities don't have that sort of a strength in fighting. Also, divergent visions within the same mobilization. So we normally say that, yeah, this is a civil effort, I don't know, from the El Morro in the first study case I show you, but it's very common to find different visions within the same movement. And that's not a good thing because, of course, it will make the struggle more difficult and also harder to remain in time, because this demands your energy, this demands your time. If you live in a low-income area, basically you are investing your resources to protect this, right? So in the Melendez River case, which is El Morro case, we had this situation where local leaders start just developing different visions of the river. So the river that was next to El Morro, the hill, some will say that they want 100% preservation, like a preservation emphasis, and some others will say that they want more like a sustainable use figure, so to be more flexible. And also another thing is that when livelihoods depend or not on the course of local politics. So for example, in a very high income area in Cali, I guess it was one of the first examples I mentioned to you, the motorway. Yeah, they team up with an artist in order to place emphasis on the wildlife of this green corridor. And they all were professors, right? So their livelihoods didn't depend on any local politics whatsoever. And they just rely on the technical side. But it was very common for me in the other study cases to find these very dangerous or sensitive balance between what I defend and against whom I am defending this, and if potentially my livelihood will depend on that person or that mayor or that politician, then I would probably just keep a low profile. So that was a very important thing that stood out in the study cases, depending on the economic place, socioeconomic place you were standing in the city. Now, another reflection is, what about probably the city and citizens in general? They are not always ready to listen to your story. So why El Morro struggle in 2014? They mobilized a lot of artifacts. I mentioned to you this technical report with participatory work behind. It was a powerful tool. The local government actually declared the area, but excluding El Morro. And for the citywide speaking, the story just didn't resonate as much as 3 years later with the other wetland. In the case of the transport terminal that I told you, that all the city, the newspaper and everyone were talking about this El Cortijo Wetland. So it's also a kind of an idea just to keep in mind that probably the discourse of the urban green, they have momentum sometimes, and sometimes you just lost the momentum for these kind of stories. I don't know, it's just like an open question. And then also some collateral effects of your protected narrative. And that's the case in New York with the High Line, that it implied also green gentrification. So you managed to conserve this structure and just allow the wilderness to take over a linear park, but then the areas around this became really, really expensive, and so local people were not able to afford them anymore. So that's kind of an effect that you were not expecting. So it's already 9:40. I will just leave it up there. Here, as I mentioned, sorry if you are feeling dizzy, but yeah, here is one example of Cape Town and the example from New York. But I will really love to listen to your questions and comments. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that, Maria. It's Peter here speaking. Did you want me to read you the questions, or did you want to bring them up? How would you like to do this?
Oh, okay. Now I see here the Q&A box.
Yep.
So great presentation, thank you. Development narratives are usually seen as being counter to protective stories. Yes, let me go over again this question. My brain is a bit tired now. I find your idea of readiness to listen to protective illustration interesting. Any thoughts on how can we build that? Okay, I will try to answer that, and please just interrupt me if I'm not. Oh, okay, someone supports the mural canvas. That's good. Yeah, for example, there was a third study case. It was not included in my thesis, but it was the highest socioeconomic example that I had in Cali, right in the very south of the city. There, the families start talking about appropriating the discourse of the Ramsar Convention. Like that didn't happen ever before. Like, you know, housewives were talking about the importance of urban wetlands. And I'm not sure if that will have been possible 3 or 4 years ago, because, you know, this whole topic of urban biodiversity, of urban nature is kind of an emerging field, right? So I don't know if this has to do with the idea of when the city is ready to listen to such a story. These people have been screaming like for years, and we should start like looking seriously at these protected stories, like how are they coming into shape and so on and so forth. So I don't know, but Maria, if I answer your question, but yes, this is definitely an idea that I draw at the very end of my thesis, like why you have resonance one time, you know, like in 2017 and not in 2014 about the urban green in a Colombian city. So that's an open question. I don't know if you guys have any reactions or comments or examples nearby your houses about this kind of mobilizations.
Claudia has raised her hand. I might be able to. You should be able to unmute yourself, Claudia, as well.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I can't write type questions. Anyway, doesn't matter. Thank you, Maria. That was a really, really nice presentation and very interesting case study. I think it's interesting to see how people mobilize from the ground and take things for this. We need to protect this, and how they connect with the land. And so you presented the cases of how people mobilizing for the wetland or for the El Morro, for the hill. And with different contexts, so some with low-income communities or high-income communities that definitely demonstrate issues of inequality, and that is very common in those developing countries. I think considering those issues, probably it's a little bit related with what Maria was asking, is how do you see the opportunities to allow more deliberation between all these different groups, and so they can bring together their expectations, their needs, and so not just to be something that is happening in the ground, but is really impacting and translating into real policies and strategies.
So that's a very good question, because a lot of variables come into play for this. So for example, we identify, I don't know if you remember in El Morro study case, I mentioned this consultancy. Within the framework of adaptive capacity, these kind of actors are very important because they are like knowledge brokers. So sometimes you need these intermediate actors that would link different scales, either of governance or knowledge or practices. So we see that in the wetland mobilizations here in Bogota, which was a very important movement 2 decades ago, and they managed to impact policy frameworks because basically the city was saying, we don't have any wetlands. We don't even know what that is. We don't even have a word to define them. And so, you know, citizens start gathering, and they brought technical knowledge with local knowledge, and they start like saying, oh no, hold on, Bogota, we actually do have a network of urban wetlands, and the number of hectares accounting for wetlands is, I don't know, probably 3 times higher or more than what you initially identified. And after that, Bogota drafted the Bogota's wetland policy, right? It's still a lot of challenges, of course, because now they implemented these co-management arrangements, but in order to classify to this co-management, you need to have like a certain level of like economic power, your NGO. So not all NGOs in Bogota have that. So yeah, it's still challenges, but that was one example that with technical knowledge and local knowledge, they managed to impact these policy frameworks. But yeah, sometimes like the motivation behind this framework for the author is that we increasingly have evidence of how civil efforts are protecting nature, because our traditional idea is that it comes top-down, right? Like it's like a top-down process, basically oriented by scientific elites. So you will say that that place hold very high ecological value. But now what we are seeing is the other way around, where organized citizens basically are saying, no, hold on, this doesn't hold a value for a housing project. It actually holds a value for our cults, our golf course, or entertainment or conservation, and that's one of the motivations behind this framework. And the other one is just to unpack these power relations.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. I don't know. I really love the last example from Cape Town. So allow me here, and please interrupt you guys if you have any comments or reactions or whatever. But I will just like to close with this kind of fantasy touch in our. Sometimes we need fantasy and we need nice stories to protect and connect with urban nature. So this is the case of. Oops. I don't know if you are you, no, hold on. I don't know if I shared the correct window. Sorry about that. Can you guys please confirm if you are?
Yes, I can see the screen again.
Oh, okay, perfect. So in this case, a very powerful artifact, and I will just read it out loud because it's very nice. And actually, in some seminars, recent seminars, this study cases start being approached as an example of regenerative justice and regenerative design, if I pronounce that correctly. So a key artifact in these efforts was the legend of how European sailors had raped and killed an indigenous princess. So the legend places the princess in the Elephant's Eye Cave, which is here, where Table Mountain is. And basically, after being raped and with no clothes at all, the princess just hide in one of these caves. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing the legend, right? So the princess hide in a cave and she cried, and her tears floated down the mountain to fill up the wetland that was on the other side of the city. And just the idea of bringing the legend back again to life, and the people start talking about this, start tracing an ecological connectivity, but it was due to an ancestral story, like the princess crying, the tears flowing down, and then the tears basically creating this huge wetland that hosts ancestral and indigenous values. But it was in a very neglected area of Cape Town. So the mountains are in these wide areas, and the wetland, they have historically been just like understood as less favored in places no one wants to be there, like no one would like to visit. So just bringing up again this story made possible to trade this connectivity, not only in terms of ecological, but also social aspects and memory aspects. And they were fighting the construction of the mall. And people start feeling that being part of this struggle and the fighting the shopping mall was also to place yourself in a wider struggle against colonial abuse and violence. So it kind of went beyond the mall itself, and it started reconnecting people from one side of the city to the other. And they in 2014, they just dropped the idea of the mall, and they made some restoration processes with native plants and native species, and as a symbol of bringing back the clothes again to the princess. So the whole campaign was called Dressing the Princess, because the wetland is called the Princess Lay. So with the native plants, you gave the princess again her clothes and her dignity, and it was also like a symbolism of the dignity of the people living around this wetland for many time. And even Desmond Tutu, that is a leader of the anti-apartheid movement, he was there, an artist of like hip hop artists, and they created a lyrics of the wetland. And you know, this design, sorry about this, a bit pixelate, but I don't know if it reminds you of on some of dissemination materials of the anti-apartheid movement. So some of the local artists and urban artists start like drafting the people's plan, what they call the people's plan. And that was a very powerful artifact. So yeah, but here, the most important one was the story of the princess. So that's, yeah, I guess that's the power of the stories. And here, the High Line of New York, basically the most important artifact here was that they hired a photographer just to show the city how it will look if wilderness will take over the place. Like New Yorkers never seen something like this, like a linear park in the sky, you know, like with wilderness all around. And they commissioned this photographer and they showcase the photos in a gallery. And they start like doing a lot of lobbying with newspaper and local media. And the New York Times wrote about this, and people start listening and paying attention. But this was obviously, like, I don't know if you can tell, but it was a better, well-off social group that had the means to commission this kind of professional photographer. And then an also powerful artifact here is that they commission an economic study that will demonstrate the value of keeping this park or this new park, linear park as it is, in terms of taxes that you could collect in the areas around. So that, yeah, that it's very nice to start comparing cases, because again, you find new artifacts and new ideas and surprises, and you will never imagine that how powerful these photos were to bring the idea of almost like a very weird space and like kind of strange to people to actually turn into a model of public space in New York. Yeah, so I just wanted to close with these two very different and unique stories on its kind. And I really hope, for me, it was very gratifying to approach this framework. It really gave me like new lenses to analyze the city. And my dream now will be just to compile like a lot of cases and examples around the world where these stories are taking place. So I encourage you to go further a little in this social production of ecosystem services. And yeah, I don't know if we have any final comments. We still have five minutes.
Well, thanks so much for your presentation today, Maria. It was super interesting, and thanks to everyone for joining us online. This presentation has been recorded as well, so we'll put the links up online and share those with all the fellow people as well, and feel free to share yourself as well, Maria. So I guess, yeah, on behalf of everyone here at FENA, thanks so much for joining us today, and Claudia, thanks for making this happen as well.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Claudia. So nice to be here. Such an honor. Thank you, guys. Really, it's such an honor to be in your seminar. And kudos for your FENA School of Environment and Society. I'm a big fan now.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay, so you guys take care, and good evening from Bogota.
Bye.